So it's no secret since forward-facing sonar came out, jerkbaits have gotten way more popular. It seems like everybody and their brother now has one on deck for that specific reason, because we've seen the power that live scope shows us what a jerkbait has and how it draws fish up and how you can catch a ton more fish, especially when you can see them. But there's a few different things that I do to jerkbaits to really change the action of it and change the versatility of it. And that's what I want to talk about today, is some jerkbait tips and tricks and modifications that I do to help get you more bites out there on the water. So the first thing that I want to talk about with jerkbaits is going to be the sound that they make. Because of the nature of a jerkbait, you know, you're throwing it in clear water generally, it's most oftentimes around finicky fish. You know, you're not throwing a jerkbait because they're munching a chatterbait like crazy. You're throwing a jerkbait because you need to get them to react, and you can't find any other way to do it, right? Jerkbaits typically are known for catching big fish, catching a lot of fish, but you can also lose fish on a jerkbait, especially if you're around smallmouth and spotted bass, because they're so mean that when they come up to it and eat it, they have a tendency to get one of these treble hooks and throw it. So people most oftentimes don't reach for a jerkbait as the first choice. So if you're throwing a jerkbait, you're around finicky fish. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is the sound that they make. And if you'll notice on the bottom of this jerkbait, it says silent. So one thing that I absolutely love is 6th Sense came out with a line of jerkbaits that is specifically silent. They make it in a regular model, and they also, this is what they normally sound like, and they also make it in a +1 model. It's called a 6th Sense Provoke DD. So this one makes rattles, but they also make the same body, same bill size without rattles, which is super, super convenient, because the most oftentimes what I see happen, and we've all seen it, if you've watched live scope, you see those fish get right up on it. And it seems like no matter how many times you twitch it, they are right up on there. And I believe the most often reason that they don't eat it is because of the sound that it is emitting. You know, sound is great when you're around really eager fish, when you're around windy or wavy conditions. But when you have conditions like we have today, a little bit of wind and some sun and no clouds in the sky, it can really shy those fish away from eating a jerkbait. And so the first thing that I do is I throw a silent bait. Now, the next thing that everybody talks about with a jerkbait is the fall rate of a jerkbait. Do you want it to suspend? Do you want it to rise? Do you want it to fall? All of which play different roles depending on where you're fishing it. So most oftentimes, it's never a bad idea to have one suspend. If you can make one perfectly suspend, by all means, do that, because it's going to benefit you most of the time. But there are times when I like it to rise, and there are times when I like it to fall. If you're fishing around shallow grass beds, for example, I like my jerkbait to rise a little bit, so that way it keeps it up out of that grass. If you're fishing in Florida, if you're fishing up north even in grass, it's a good way to get more bites by keeping your bait free of grass. Now, one of the reasons that I would like a bait to sink is if I'm trying to fish a jerkbait deeper. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can make a jerkbait sink. I oftentimes go to a Megabass +1 because I like the diving action of it a little bit better. But the first way that I will make this bait sink is I will upgrade the hooks, and instead of having traditional 6s, I will put 4s on there, which is going to make this bait sink. It may take a little bit of time, but you can put bigger hooks on there in order to make it sink faster. You can also put what's called suspend strips, which are little strips that have adhesive on the bottom. But if you're gonna put those on there, put them underneath the nose right here or underneath the middle, because you want that bait to sink head first, because that's going to give you the most diving depth out of that bait. And so that's how you get this bait to dive a little bit deeper, and that's how you can really show those fish in a deeper depth a bait that they haven't seen in a while. Most oftentimes those fish never see a jerkbait because most people aren't willing to take the time to weight the hooks or weight the bait and, you know, go to a little bit thinner line, go to 8, 10, 6-pound test to get that bait as deep as possible. And so that's how you can really get that bait a little bit deeper. Now, one thing that's really cool is if you're fishing in an area where you know you have a shot at some giant fish, what you can do is, because a jerkbait has a history of losing fish, is you can upgrade the hooks. And you might say, well, John, I want my bait to suspend perfectly. If you're going to do that, upgrade the front and the back hook, and then take the middle hook off. So that way you're left with just the front and the back hook, because let's face it, most oftentimes it's going to get the back hook or the whole thing anyway, and so that back hook is the most important. But that is a way to make that bait suspend in a way that will get you more bites by using bigger hooks and getting a bigger hook on those fish, so that way you can get those big fish in the boat and not have to worry about losing them as much. So we talked about when you're fishing around finicky fish, you're throwing a jerkbait, and that's the reason why you're throwing a jerkbait. And if you'll notice, jerkbaits come in a lot of different colors and a lot of different sizes. You can get them in a really natural color that's like looks like a plain shad. But a lot of times if you're fishing that jerkbait in clear water, it never seems like you have the right color. It seems like those fish are always coming up to it and shying away from it. And so one thing that I did is you can actually take the back of your scissors and actually scrape off some of the color to your bait. And so I'll show you what this bait originally looked like if I can get one out of here. This bait originally looks like this, where it has this tan back and tan belly. And what I did is I scraped that off of there to now make it look way more translucent with that little bit of chrome. And so on a sunny day like this, when I'm chasing fish that are suspended, this is just another way to get even more bites. And you'll notice that silent is also right there too. And so I've changed the color profile of this bait to get me even more bites in a way that probably I wouldn't have before, because those fish can get up close to it and get too good of a look at it. And so modifying the color on your jerkbait is absolutely key, and you can do this the way I did it. You can also use Sharpie markers to make it even darker. Use all these different tools in your arsenal in order to make that bait the exact color that you need it, because a lot of times matching the shad profile or matching the bluegill profile or matching whatever bait fish you're chasing is going to be really, really key when those fish are coming up and really, really inspecting your bait. So keep an open mind on what your bait looks like and what the fish are actually looking for. Now, one other thing you can do with a jerkbait to help your hookup ratio is going to be adding an extra split ring on top of the one that you already have on there. So when you look at your bait, it comes with a solid metal loop that's ingrained in the bait. Then you have a split ring, and then you have your hook. What you can do is add an extra split ring, and what that's going to do is it's going to give you a little bit more length. And what it's also going to do is it's going to make that bait be able to spin a lot more, so fish don't get the leverage that they have. You can also add a braid loop into here, which is where you take and make an actual braided line loop on here, so that way your bait can spin and not get caught up on the split rings like this, because that's most oftentimes why people lose fish with a jerkbait, is those fish get leverage on it and they start twisting and rolling, and you're pulling on it on a weird angle, and you give the fish the upper hand. So with adding an extra split ring or making a braid loop, you actually take the leverage away from the fish and actually have a better land ratio once you've hooked that fish. Now I will say, hooks are going to be absolutely critical on these baits that you're running, because it's such a finesse bait, and it's because it's such a slap at bait. Those fish are always coming up and just kissing it, just slapping at it. The reason people lose fish is because they're not changing their hooks often enough, or they have the wrong hooks on there. You know, I will say that the 6 Sense model lineup comes with triple grip style hooks on there that actually do extremely well. I have a really high land ratio with those, but everybody knows that the Mega Bass versions come with really light wire hooks. You know, in Japan, those baits are made to be run on finesse spinning rod gear, but over here we don't. We run it on bait casting gear, and so we end up bending those hooks out. So I will go to some Owner STXs. I'll have them linked down below, just like I always do with everything. But I will go with Owner STX 36s, or I will go with these Owner hybrids as an upgraded treble. It's just something that when you get those bites, you want to make sure you get them in the boat. And so it's something that I upgrade these hooks to do to help catch me those fish, because it's something that people really don't ever think about, but it really changes the action of the bait, and it also changes how you catch those fish. Because the hooks you put on there actually are going to change the action of the bait. The more weight you put on there, the less action it's going to give that bait. The same thing goes with the line that you run it on. The heavier the line you run a jerkbait on, the less action that it's going to have. So I typically like to run my jerkbaits on 10 to 12 pound. If I'm fishing around giant fish and grass, I'll go to 15. But I really always try to use the lightest line that I can get away with, because it gives me the most action out of these baits. And everybody knows the action is what's key to a jerkbait. And so if you guys have watched me fish it, I like to do a twitch and then point the rod straight back at the bait. And then I will do a twitch, and then point that rod straight back. And what I'm doing is I'm actually giving that bait slack to allow it to have the most action. But, so one other bait that goes extremely well with a jerkbait is going to be a topwater spook. Up here, I will have a video linked on all of the baits that I like for suspending and schooling fish. because that's going to be something that a jerkbait is going to play extremely well with. Everybody knows that having a jerkbait on deck when you're chasing schooling fish is a must-have. So check that video out to learn the other 4 baits that I really like to throw with that. But thank you guys so much for watching. Smash that subscribe button to follow on with the content, and God bless every single one of you guys, and I hope to see you in the next video.